Ich denke, es kommen immer noch Fragen zu der Kriegsgefahr, da allerdings der Abend doch.
We still have questions coming in on the war danger.
Möchte ich.
But since this event will go on forever, I do want to change the subject to Greece. And we have gotten a question from an associate professor for sociology, George Zobanoglu. And he says that the situation in Greece can only be described as a social catastrophe. He writes that the Greek government is still there's no representation in the tax system. No taxation without representation. So you pay taxes, but you're not being represented. That's the old problem. And he's talking about social welfare organizations, healthcare organizations, for children, for elderly people. All those organizations are becoming very rare, so that even non-government organizations like the president of Doctors of the World they have already talked about this, that this is a total catastrophic situation. It's an organized social chaos, what's going on. He's talking about youth unemployment, 53%, general unemployment, over 20%. And the projections are that more than 1.4 million Greeks will be unemployed at the end of this year. So there's a black market, black labor market, and there's no social structures. His question is, looking at this catastrophic situation in Greece, what is your perspective, Mrs. Zepp-LaRouche, for Greece, which could lead to a change in the situation?
Well, I think we need in each land, in each country in Europe, referenda to decide whether we want to remain in such a system. Because the whole idea of Europe has been carried out ad absurdum. I'm not anti-European, absolutely not. I'm very happy to be from Europe. We have wonderful culture. We've had the Greek antique period. We have the European culture from the pre-Socratics to Plato. We have the great poets. Solon of Athens described the sort of humanity very adequately. We have the Italian Renaissance. We had Joan of Arc in France, who was very important for building the nation-state. We have the École Polytechnique. We have a great European tradition. But does that have anything to do with the Europe that we have today, with President Rompuy or Lady Ashton? Do they represent Europe? Certainly not. Because we were told that peace had to be held forever in Europe, that there would never again be a war between European nations, that we had to unite our position vis-à-vis the emerging countries. And what has that led to? Because we can say that right now the distrust and the hatred among European peoples in Europe was never as great as it is today. We have people in some of the southern European countries who were burning the German flag. You have Merkel, who is shown in an SS uniform, and when in the north we said, oh, the people in the south are just lazy bums. This is a real deterioration, a real decomposition of the European idea. It could hardly be worse. And And then you have the emerging countries like China and so on, and they look at these failed European states and they say, well, is this Europe supposed to be a superpower? And they burst out laughing. So Chancellor Merkel went to China to try and beg the Chinese to bail out Europe by investing here. And the Chinese answered politely, but, clearly that, no, thank you, we're not interested. And that was clear. So what was given as a pretext and what has actually occurred are two completely different things. So we need referendum. We need to discuss what kind of Europe do we really want to have. A Europe of the fatherlands, such as de Gaulle proposed, composed of sovereign republics who work together, who cooperate together on common projects. Absolutely, yes. But we don't need this bureaucratic apparatus in Brussels and Strasbourg and Luxembourg. We hardly know who they are. Nobody voted for them. They have no accounts to deliver to the voters. And now we're going very clearly toward a federal state in the EU, and there's such a discrepancy between the people in all of the countries and this highly inflated bureaucratic apparatus that things cannot continue like this for very long. So I think we need a different kind of debate. For Greece, for example, I think that including for German industrialists who are pushing for an austerity program, this cannot work. We have a Marshall Plan, but it should not be based on green technologies. Now we have proposals, for example, to fill up Greece with solar panels, so that the energy can then be exported, and that's a completely wrong idea, because the energy density, flux density of solar power is really, really low, and it goes against the laws of the universe, which always tends toward higher energy flux densities. So what we need is to build up the Eurasian land bridge, for example. We need a connection to Asia Minor. We have to consider the entire Mediterranean area as an area of development, including that then spreads into Africa. And all of the member countries of the EU should be drawn into this Marshall Plan. It's not just for Greece, but also for Italy or Spain and Portugal. But we can take as our common obligation, duty, to develop Africa. And that should be that task, that mission should be what unites the European countries. This task can define what Europe should become, because I have long been convinced that if we in Europe are not able to develop Africa, and that Africa dies because of our unfitness to develop it, and not through war, but through this lack of development, that would also spell the sword of Europe. And I think in every country here, in Greece and everywhere else, we need a debate on this. What kind of a Europe do we want? Europe of the dictators? Europe with no sovereignty? With no democracy? Which is where the people are further and further alienated from the governing structures. We need culture. We need the Greek classics, the Italian Renaissance, the Deutsch classics, and that should be the basis for the dialogue and the cooperation between all of us. And we need a debate on this, because for the moment, the silence, absolute silence over the disintegration of Europe is amazing. And Mrs. Merkel always says, oh, if the euro falls apart, then all of Europe will fall apart. No, that's not true. The euro will fall apart, and either we'll go into an endless collapse, or we will bring about a Europe of sovereign republics with a common development strategy and a common renaissance with the best of our wonderful culture.